The heat entered before the cadets did. Forgemaster Varus 6 watched from the observation deck. His spinal ridges flickered amber along his neck. 42 vertebrae, each ridge containing 8 color-sensitive clusters. The amber meant operational readiness. It meant the system was functioning as designed. Below, the Class 9 ignition crucible sat dormant. 12 induction towers arranged in a hexagonal pattern. 8 magnaflux presses with pressure seals rated for 220 atmospheres. 4 tensile shearing arms calibrated to apply 14,000 kilograms of closing force. All of it calibrated to 1700 degrees Celsius at peak. He had failed 4,231 cadets across 80 cycles. Each failure carved into his primary arm's inner plate. The tally was a ritual. His species signaled competence through visible damage. The stress fractures along his left primary arm had gone unrepaired for 40 cycles. That was the point. Every crack told a story, every scar was a credential. 55 attempted last cycle, the Vexari adjutant whispered. His name was Creel. Varus had never bothered to learn it. The adjutant's gelatinous mantle rippled with each word, a translucent membrane that caught the crucible's orange glow. Creel's species dissolved in pressure below 40 atmospheres. The test would kill him if he ever had to take it. That was why he worked the observation deck. 18 survived transport to medical, Creel continued. 3 passed qualification. Varus's ridges held amber. The blast door lifted. She was the 47th to enter. No species designation. No homeworld classification. No weapon. No species designation. No homeworld classification. No weapon. The intake form had listed her origin as Tellurian, a word Varus's translation implant flagged as 12,000 years obsolete. The implant whined once at the base of his skull. A low-frequency hum that meant the archive had no cross-reference. No behavioral profile, no pressure threshold, no heat tolerance curve. She stood 157 centimeters tall. Soft tissue, mammalian. Her hair pulled back so tight it lifted the corner of her left eyebrow. The skin at her temples was pale, almost translucent. Varus could see a vein pulsing there. Slow, rhythmic, 82 beats per minute. She carried nothing except a small steel needle. Earlier that day, the crucible floor held 60 cadets. The floor plates glowed at 400 degrees Celsius. The heat rose in waves. Tracked fusion plates clicked with thermal stress, the sound like ice cracking under weight that should have held. HFY cycled through their 4-lung systems at 22% above normal frequency. Their breath fogged the air for a moment before the heat ate it. Illyrin stood perfectly still. Their muscle fibers were already microcrystallizing from the heat. The process was visible if you knew where to look. Tiny white veins spreading under their gray skin like frost on a window. The Illyrin would survive. They always did. Crystallization was their species' stress response. It made them brittle but alive. The Academy's 12,000-year classification system operated as designed. Varus raised all 4 manipulator arms. His primary arms were fused carbon, black, dense. The left one carried the tally, 4,231 vertical lines carved into the inner plate, each line 1 millimeter apart, each line representing a cadet who had walked in and failed to walk out whole. His secondary arms were precision graspers, delicate instruments designed for calibration and adjustment. They had never touched a cadet. They never would. First test, he announced. Pressure forming, 220 atmospheric magnaflux chambers. 30 seconds to shape raw carbonyl without fracture. Cadets who fail. Is there a filtration issue? The voice was human, small. Freya Corbin had not raised her hand. She was looking at a ceiling vent where superheated air shimmered at 80 degrees. The vent was 20 centimeters wide, standard atmospheric bleed-off. Varus had never noticed it before. He had worked this crucible for 80 cycles. The vent had always been there. The air feels thick, she said. A trackhead beside her made a grinding sound, mandibles locked in confusion. The trackhead's name was Ves. Varus knew this because Ves had the highest pressure tolerance of any cadet in the cohort. His file said he could survive 200 atmospheres for up to 45 seconds. The file was probably wrong. Files were usually wrong. The atmosphere is 34% superheated oxygen, Varus said. It is not a comfort system. Begin. He watched the trackhead's mandibles unlock, watched the confusion cycle through Ves's compound eyes, watched Freya turn back to her workstation without another word. The 220 atmospheric chambers sealed over each cadet's workstation. The seal was magnetic. The chamber was transparent. Varus could see every cadet's face as the pressure began to climb. The Vexari showed it first, their gelatinous bodies compressing, eyes bulging, mantles flattening against the chamber walls. The trackad lasted longer. Their exoskeletons were designed for deep-sea pressure on their homeworld, but deep-sea pressure was 100 atmospheres. This was more than double. Counters displayed 30 seconds. Varys watched the numbers drop. 28 seconds, 26, 24, 22 seconds. The first Vexari ruptured, gelatinous body collapsing through pressure grates at the bottom of the chamber. The sound was wet, soft, like a fruit dropped from height. Creel's mantle went still. The adjutant had stopped breathing. 20 seconds, 3 more Vexari followed. Their chambers fogged pink. 18 seconds, the HFY began to fail. Not rupture, their biology was different. Their 4 lung systems collapsed inward. They suffocated from the inside. The examiner on the observation deck, an older HFY named Thes, made a sound like steam escaping a pipe. Grief or recognition. Varys couldn't tell the difference anymore. 15 seconds. Varys's ridges flickered crimson. The color meant suppressed rage. He wasn't angry at the cadets. He was angry at the test. The test was correct. The test was calibrated. The test had been working for 12,000 years. 13 seconds. The trackhead began to shatter. 12 seconds, 11, 27 seconds. 8 trackhead fusion plates shattered audibly. The sound was sharp, catastrophic, like ice cracking under weight that should have held. Ves was one of them. Varys watched the trackhead's exoskeleton spiderweb, watched the cracks spread from his thorax to his head, watched his mandibles go slack. 29 seconds. Varys's sensors flagged workstation 47. Freya had produced a small jar of salt from her belt. The jar was glass, 10 centimeters tall, label worn smooth. The salt inside was white, fine-grained. Varys's database had no record of salt as a forging aid. He checked twice. Nothing. She unscrewed the lid, sprinkled the salt on the carbonally billet. 1 grain stuck to her thumb. She flicked it off. The grain landed on the chamber floor. It did not melt. The floor was 400 degrees. The salt should have melted. She pressed THE Chinese letter plate with her bare palm. No magnaflux chamber engaged. No pressure seal. THE Chinese letter plate was designed to apply uniform force across the billet's surface. It required a chamber to function. The chamber was sealed. The pressure was 220 atmospheres. Freya's palm was touching THE Chinese letter plate through the chamber wall. Varys rewound the sensor feed, checked the chamber's integrity. The chamber was intact. The pressure was holding. Freya's hand was on the other side of an impermeable magnetic seal. The alloy warped perfectly into a blade geometry that Varys's database flagged as inefficient. Redirects torsional stress to ricasso. The blade was 15 centimeters long, curved. The ricasso, the unsharpened portion just above the handle, was thicker than standard. That was the inefficiency. The blade would twist in the hand under impact. It would not hold an edge through repeated strikes. Freya looked at the blade, then at the ceiling vent. "That wasn't so bad," she said. The observation deck was silent for 3 full seconds. Creel's mantle rippled once, then stopped. Thes's steam pipe grief sound cut off mid-whistle. The other examiners, 12 of them representing 6 species, had stopped moving entirely. Varys could hear the crucible's ambient systems, the hum of the induction towers, the tick of cooling magnaflux presses, the soft whisper of atmospheric bleed-off through the vent Freya had noticed. "That's impossible," Creel whispered. "She's Tellurian," Thes said. The HFY's voice was hoarse. "The archive doesn't have." "The archive has nothing," Varys said. His ridges cycled through 3 colors in 4 seconds. Amber, crimson, dark. The word Tellurian echoed through his translation implant again. 12,000 years obsolete. But the word existed in the archive for a reason. Tellurian. Earth-birthed, from a world the Vexari hegemony had flagged as unsuitable for classification. In cycle 112. The implant whined. No cross-reference, no behavioral profile, no pressure threshold, no heat tolerance curve. The archive had nothing. "Second test," Varys announced. His voice held. It had to hold. "Induction arc welding, 1700 degrees Celsius, 8 minutes. Cadets will join 3 dissimilar metals at molecular junction." Freya was already walking to the induction tower. Not running, walking. Her boots made soft contact sounds against 400-degree floor plates. Sounds Varys's photoreceptors tracked with increasing disbelief. Each step was deliberate, measured. Her weight transferred from heel to toe with no hesitation. The boots were leather. The leather should have been smoking. It wasn't. She reached into the tower's exposed calibration port. The port was 20 centimeters wide. Behind it, the tower's internal systems ran at 1890 degrees. The calibration port was supposed to be sealed during testing. It wasn't. The seal had failed during the previous cycle. Varus had filed a maintenance request. The request was still pending. The tower output read 1890 degrees. Freya's hand was inside the port. Varus could see her fingers moving. She was searching for something. Her face showed no pain, no discomfort. The skin on her hand should have been blistering. It wasn't. She pulled out a single thermal coupling wire, 0.8 millimeters in diameter, rated for 2,000 degrees continuous. The wire was designed to connect the tower's temperature sensors to its control systems. Without it, the tower couldn't regulate its output. That was why the temperature had spiked. Freya wrapped the wire around the steel needle from her boot. Twice, she checked the loop, pulled it tight. The wire bit into the needle's eye. The needle was 64 millimeters long, steel. The eye was 0.8 millimeters in diameter, exactly the same as the wire. Varus's database noted the precision, noted that Freya had not measured, noted that her fingers had moved with the certainty of someone who had done this before. She nodded once. "What is she?" Creel began. Freya inserted the needle-wrapped wire into the Magnaflux chamber's pressure relief valve. The valve was designed to open at 250 atmospheres. A safety mechanism. The chamber was at 220. The valve should have held. It didn't. Freya had wedged the needle into the valve's release mechanism. The wire looped around the pressure sensor. The needle's tip pressed against the seal's weakest point. The valve stuck open. Chamber pressure dropped from 220 atmospheres to 14 atmospheres in 11 seconds. The drop was violent. The chamber's interior fogged as superheated oxygen vented through the relief valve. The fog was white, dense. Varus couldn't see Freya for 3 seconds. When the fog cleared, she was still standing. She had the 3 metals arranged on her workstation. Copper alloy, carbon steel, titanium composite. Each metal had a different melting point. Copper melted at 1,085 degrees. Carbon steel at 1,400. Titanium at 1,668. The induction tower's arc was set to 1,700 degrees. Freya picked up the copper alloy with her bare hand. The metal was at ambient temperature. The ambient temperature was 400 degrees. The copper should have burned her. It didn't. She placed the copper against the carbon steel, pressed them together. The induction tower's arc jumped between them. The copper melted first, then the carbon steel. The 2 metals flowed into each other. Molecular bonding visible to Varus's sensors as a shift in density. She added the titanium composite. The arc jumped again. The titanium melted at 1,668 degrees just below the tower's output. The bond formed in 3 seconds. She welded the 3 metals. In 94 seconds, not 8 minutes. The bond was perfect. Varus's sensors showed no voids, no crystallization at the boundaries, no thermal stress fractures. The joint was stronger than the base metals. That wasn't possible. Varus's ridges went dark, then white, then a color that had no translation, a frequency his species reserved for watching their own hatchlings fall into magma vents. The color meant the observer was witnessing something that should not exist. "Heart rate," Tess whispered. The HFY was staring at his biometric display. No elevated cortisol. No stress markers. Heart rate 82 beats per minute. "That's her resting," Creel started. "That's her resting rate," Tess finished. "Quiet," Varus said. His voice cracked like cooling carbon. The observation deck held 15 aliens. None of them spoke. Varus could hear his own ridges humming. The color with no translation had faded to gray. Gray meant system failure. His ridges had never gone gray before. He didn't know what it meant. He looked at his primary arm's inner plate. 4,231 vertical lines. Each line 1 millimeter apart. Each line representing a cadet who had walked in and failed to walk out whole. None of them had been Tellurian. "Third test," he announced. His manipulator arms trembled. A stress response he hadn't experienced since losing his primary forge hand to a Class 7 plasma backfire. That was 60 cycles ago. He still had the scar. His species signaled competence through visible damage. The scar was a credential. The trembling was not. "Tensile strength evaluation," he said. 14,000 kilograms closing force. 11 seconds to failure threshold. The 60 cadets were now 22. The Trackhead had carried out their shattered. Vess's exoskeleton was in 3 pieces. He would survive. The Trackhead medical team was already reconstructing his carapace. He would never forge again. The Academy didn't care. The Academy only cared about the test. The Vexari had been scraped from pressure grates. Their gelatinous bodies would regenerate in 6 to 8 weeks. They would be assigned to administrative roles, paperwork, logistics, work that didn't require pressure tolerance. The Illurin stood with crystallized muscle fiber protruding through dermal layers. The white veins had spread across their arms and chests. They would survive. They always did. The crystallization would reverse in 3 to 4 months. They would be eligible for retesting. The HFY had been evacuated. Their collapsed lungs were being reinflated in the medical bay. They would not return to the crucible. The HFY had a 63% failure rate on the pressure test. The Academy had adjusted their standards 3 times. The failure rate remained. 22 cadets remained. Freya Corbin was one of them. She walked to the tensile press. The press was 2 meters tall, hydraulic. The closing plate was 1 meter square. 14,000 kilograms of force applied across the entire surface. The press had crushed 5 cadets in Varus's 80 cycles, not killed, crushed. The survivors were in long-term care. The Academy didn't track them after discharge. Freya removed the steel needle from her boot. She unwrapped the thermal coupling wire. The wire was still intact, still rated for 2,000 degrees. She laid it on the floor beside her, then she sat down. Cross-legged, directly beneath the 14,000-kilogram press plate. The plate was 50 centimeters above her head. Varus's sensors calculated the clearance. The plate would contact her skull at 4,000 kilograms, her spine at 7,000, her pelvis at 11. At 14,000, every bone in her body would fracture. The press had been calibrated to cause failure at 11 seconds. The calibration assumed a standing subject. Freya was not standing. She began sewing. The needle pierced her own uniform sleeve. The fabric was standard Academy issue, woven carbon fiber, rated for abrasion resistance, not puncture. The needle went through it like cloth. Then the carbon alloy billet from test 1. The billet was 5 centimeters thick, tempered. The needle went through it like wood. Then the Magnaflux chamber seal from test 2. The seal was rubberized steel, designed to hold 220 atmospheres. The needle went through it like paper. "What is she stitching?" the tracked survivor asked. His name was Jex. He had lost 2 of his 4 arms to the pressure test. The stumps were already clotting. Tracked hemolymph was thick, dark blue. It dripped onto the floor plates and sizzled. Varus whispered, "Pressure geometry." The term came from the archive. It was 12,000 years old, older than the Academy, older than the Vexari hegemony. It referred to a technique for redirecting compressive force through layered materials of different densities. The technique had been classified as theoretically impossible in cycle 300. The archive had no practical applications, no documented uses, no surviving practitioners. Freya was sewing. The needle moved in and out of the materials. The thread was the thermal coupling wire. The wire was rated for 2,000 degrees. It was also rated for 40 kilograms of tensile strength, not 14,000. The wire should have snapped the moment the press applied force. The press descended. 3,000 kilograms. The assembly held. The wire stretched but did not break. The needle's eye held the loop. 7,000 kilograms. The sewn redirect began, lateral force bleeding through 4 different material densities. The billet compressed. The seal deformed. The uniform sleeve shredded. 11,000 kilograms. The needle's eye held the wire. The wire held the seal. The seal held the geometry. The geometry transferred force sideways, away from Freya's body, into the press's support columns. The press plate contacted her shoulder and stopped. The force gauge read 14,000 kilograms applied, 3,200 kilograms delivered to contact surface. Freya's shoulder should have shattered. Her clavicle should have snapped. Her spine should have compressed. None of that happened. The press plate hung there, immobile. 14,000 kilograms of hydraulic pressure pushing down, 3,200 kilograms reaching Freya's body. The difference was the geometry, the sewing. The wire and the needle and the materials layered and stitched and redirected. Freya stood up. She brushed carbon dust from her jacket. The dust sparkled in the induction tower's residual glow. Her shoulder moved normally. No fracture, no dislocation, no pain visible on her face. She looked at the observation deck. 15 aliens stared back. "Which bone did you want me to break first?" No one answered. The press plate retracted. The hydraulics whined. The sound echoed off the crucible's walls. The observation deck was silent. 15 aliens, 15 species, 15 different biologies, all of them unable to process what they had just witnessed. Creel's mantle had gone still. The adjutant wasn't breathing. His species dissolved in pressure below 40 atmospheres. He had never seen anyone survive 14,000 kilograms of closing force. He had never seen anyone try. Thess was staring at his biometric display. The HFY's eyes were wide. His 4 lungs were cycling at maximum capacity. His heart rate had spiked to 140 beats per minute. Freya's heart rate was still 82. The other examiners had stopped moving entirely. 12 aliens frozen in place, their eyes fixed on the human standing beneath the press. Varus's ridges were gray. The color had not changed. Gray meant system failure. His ridges had been gray for 94 seconds. He didn't know how to make them change back. He looked at his primary arm's inner plate, 4,231 vertical lines, each line 1 millimeter apart, each line representing a cadet who had walked in and failed to walk out whole. None of them had asked which bone he wanted to break first. None of them had sewn. None of them had been Tellurian. The word echoed through his translation implant again. 12,000 years obsolete. The archive had no cross-reference, no behavioral profile, no pressure threshold, no heat tolerance curve. The archive had nothing. Forgemaster, Creel whispered. Varus didn't answer. Her qualification status, the adjutant pressed. Varus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The floor plates were 400 degrees. Freya's boots had made soft contact sounds against them. She had walked, not run. She had sewn, not fought. She had asked a question, not begged. The word climbed up from somewhere below his tally carvings. Below the 80 cycles. Below the 4,231 failures. Below the 12,000 years of classification. Pass. The word cost him something he couldn't name. The word hung in the air. Varus's ridges stayed gray. The observation deck remained silent. 15 aliens. 15 different biologies, all of them processing the same impossible fact. A Tellurian had passed, not broken, not barely, passed. She had passed without cheating, without bending a single rule, without doing anything the Academy could punish or prohibit or even name. She had just sewn. The press plate had retracted. Freya was walking back to her workstation. Her boots made the same soft contact sounds against the 400-degree floor plates. The sound was ordinary now, normal. That was the worst part. Forgemaster, Creel whispered. The manual requires. I know what the manual requires. Varus's translation implant whined. Low frequency. The kind of hum that meant the archive was searching for something it couldn't find. A precedent, a protocol. A single documented case of a Tellurian passing the crucible. There was none. The archive had nothing. We need to log her biometrics, Thess said. The HFY was typing on his display. His 4 lungs were still cycling too fast. Heart rate 82, cortisol baseline, thermal tolerance. The thermal tolerance was 1,890 degrees, Creel said. She reached into the calibration port. Her hand should have. Her hand didn't. No, Creel said. Her hand didn't. The adjutant's mantle rippled. Once. The ripple meant confusion. Creel's species used mantle movement to communicate emotional states. The ripple was small. Varus had learned to read it across 80 cycles of watching adjutants come and go. This ripple meant the adjutant was questioning the reliability of his own senses. The needle, Thess said. We need to log the needle, Class A structural reconfiguration tool. Origin. Tellurian, Varus said. The word still tasted wrong. 3 days later, Varus submitted his resignation. The document was standard. Form 47C request for voluntary separation from active Forgemaster duty. He filled it out in his quarters. The quarters were small. 1 room, a sleeping platform, a desk, a terminal. The walls were gray, his ridges were gray, everything was gray. He listed his reason as inability to maintain classification standards. It was true, he couldn't. The standards assumed predictability. They assumed that pressure broke bodies and heat blistered skin and 14,000 kilograms crushed bone. They assumed that a cadet who violated those assumptions was cheating. Freya hadn't cheated. She had just sewn. Varus submitted the form. The terminal confirmed receipt. He waited for the Academy's response. The response came 4 hours later. Form 47C. Request for voluntary separation, DNIED. Reason, no qualified replacement available. Assignment, curatorial services, Central Artifact Database Vault. Effective immediate. Varus read the message 3 times. Curatorial services. He was being reassigned to curatorial services. The Central Artifact Database Vault was beneath the crucible, climate-controlled. Class A containment. He had visited it once 60 cycles ago to log a failed cadet's pressure gauge. The gauge had been crushed at 200 atmospheres. The vault had labeled it Class D salvage, not for instructional use. He was being archived. He stood up, his ridges flickered. Gray to amber, amber to gray, the color wouldn't hold. Day 4, the Academy updated the Forging Crucible Training Manual. A single-line edition. Page 1247, Section 32, see paragraph 4. Cadets of Tellurian origin require pre-assessment psychological screening for supervising instructors. The change was logged at 08:47 station time. By 09:00, every examiner on Ironjaw Station had read it. By 10:00, the betting rings on the lower concourse had closed permanently. The rings had operated for 200 years, 12 permanent booths, odds posted daily, cadet survival rates, species-based failure thresholds. The rings had never closed for any reason. They closed because no one knew how to set odds on a Tellurian. No one knew if there would be more Tellurians. No one knew if Freya was an anomaly or a baseline. No one knew anything. The archive had nothing. Day 6. The steel needle was logged into the central artifact database. The entry read, Class A structural reconfiguration tool, origin, Tellurian designation. Freya's needle, composition, steel alloy unknown, thermal rating, unknown pressure rating, unknown tensile strength, unknown notes. Object demonstrated capacity to redirect 14,000 kg closing force through layered pressure geometry. Attached thermal coupling wire, 0.8 mm diameter, RATED 2000 degrees C continuous, shows no degradation after 94-second exposure to 1890 degrees C. Carbonyl THRADS 3 remain attached to needle eye. Pressure geometry intact. Not for instructional use. The needle was placed in a reinforced glass display case outside the crucible entrance. The case was 1 meter tall, half a meter wide, black velvet lining. The needle rested on the velvet. The thermal coupling wire still wrapped around its eye. 3 carbon alloy threads extended from its point. The same pressure geometry she had sewn under 14,000 kilograms of closing force. A plaque was mounted beneath the case. Not for instructional use, was all it said. No name, no date, no explanation. The Academy didn't want to explain. Explanation required understanding. Understanding required classification. The classification system had failed. The archive had nothing. 6 months later, Varys stood alone in the corridor. The Class 9 ignition crucible operated behind him, 47 new cadets failing the pressure test. Their biological stresses audible through 400 millimeters of plasteel. The sounds were familiar. Vexari rupturing, trackage shattering, HFY collapsing. The sounds were ordinary again. He had been in curatorial services for 183 days. His quarters were smaller now, a cot in the vault sub-basement. The walls were concrete. The temperature was constant, 15 degrees Celsius, optimal for artifact preservation. His ridges had not regained full function. The gray had become permanent. Sometimes they flickered amber. Once, for 2 seconds, they had flickered crimson. Then back to gray. He looked at the display case. The needle hadn't moved. The velvet hadn't shifted. The carbon alloy threads hadn't frayed. The pressure geometry was intact. The case was dust-free. The vault's climate control system saw to that. Varys read the plaque. Not for instructional use. He had read it before. He read it every day. He had been reading it for 183 days. The plaque meant something different each time. Today it meant, we cannot teach what we do not understand. Today it meant, we are afraid of what we cannot break. Today it meant, the archive is still empty. The floor plates, he said. No one was there to hear him. The corridor was empty. The crucible's ambient systems hummed. The induction towers ticked as they cooled. The magnaflux presses vented pressure in soft hisses. The floor plates are still vibrating, he said. They were. The magnaflux chambers were active. The pressure tests were running. The vibrations traveled through the station's structure, through the walls, through the floor, through the concrete beneath his feet. He could feel them. Or perhaps that was just him. He walked down the empty corridor. His boots made soft contact sounds against the floor plates. The same soft contact sounds Freya's boots had made. He had replayed the sensor logs 183 times. The sound was identical, leather on heated metal. Heel to toe, no hesitation. The corridor was long, 200 meters. The walls were gray. The lighting was low. The display case glowed at the far end. The needle caught the light. The wire reflected it. The threads cast small shadows on the velvet. Varys reached the end of the corridor. He stopped in front of the display case. The needle was 64 millimeters long, steel. The eye was 0.8 millimeters in diameter. The wire was wrapped twice. The threads extended from the point. The pressure geometry was visible if you knew where to look. The layering, the density shifts, the redirect pathways. He had studied the geometry for 183 days. He still didn't understand it. "The archive has nothing," he said. The words echoed off the corridor walls. The echoes were soft. The crucible's ambient systems absorbed them. The display case vibrated slightly. The needle shifted on the velvet. The threads swayed. Varus's ridges flickered. Gray to amber. The amber held for 3 seconds. Then back to gray. He turned, walked back down the corridor. The crucible's sounds grew louder as he approached. The ruptures, the shatters, the collapses. The same sounds he had heard for 80 cycles. The same sounds he would hear for the rest of his service. The Academy had not accepted his resignation. There was no qualified replacement. There would never be a qualified replacement. The classification system had failed. The system could not be replaced because the system did not know how to classify the thing that had broken it. The system was still trying. The manual had been updated. Page 1247, Section 32, see Paragraph 4. Cadets of Tellurian origin require pre-assessment psychological screening for supervising instructors. No human had applied to the Academy in 60 cycles. The screening requirement had never been used. The betting rings remained closed. The archive remained empty. Varus reached the crucible entrance. The blast door was open. 47 cadets were inside. The pressure test was in its 18th second. The first Vexari was already rupturing. The first Trackad was already shattering. The first HFY was already collapsing. He watched. The observation deck was full. Creel was there. His mantle rippling. Thess was there, his 4 lungs cycling. The other examiners were there. 12 aliens, all of them watching the same test. All of them seeing the same failures. All of them expecting the same outcome. None of them were watching for a Tellurian. There were no Tellurians. The blast door closed. The test continued. The cadets failed. The examiners logged the failures. The tally on Varus's primary arm grew. 4,232, 4,233, 4,234. Each new line 1 millimeter apart. Each new line representing a cadet who had walked in and failed to walk out whole. None of them were Tellurian. None of them would ever be Tellurian. The Academy had no way to classify Tellurians. The Academy had no way to test Tellurians. The Academy had no way to teach Tellurians. The Academy had no way to stop Tellurians. The Academy had a display case, a needle, a plaque that said not for instructional use. The Academy had a Forgemaster whose ridges had turned gray. Varus walked back to the vault. The corridor was empty. The display case glowed. The needle rested on black velvet. The wire was wrapped around the eye. The threads extended from the point. The pressure geometry was intact. He stopped. The floor plates were vibrating. The magnaflux chambers, the pressure tests. The failures, the vibrations traveled through the station's structure. Through the walls, through the floor, through the concrete beneath his feet. He could feel them. The vibrations were real. They were measurable. The sensors could detect them. The archive could log them. The classification system could categorize them as ambient station vibration, source, Class 9 forging crucible, frequency, variable amplitude, variable. The vibrations were ordinary. The floor plates had been vibrating for 80 cycles. They had been vibrating before Freya. They had been vibrating during Freya. They were vibrating now. The vibrations were real. Or perhaps they were just him. His ridges flickered. Gray to amber. Amber to gray. The color wouldn't hold. He walked down the empty corridor. The display case glowed behind him. The needle caught the light. The wire reflected it. The threads cast small shadows on the velvet. The shadows moved. The pressure geometry flexed. Not for instructional use. Not for understanding. Not for anything except the archive. Varus reached his quarters. The cot, the desk, the terminal, the walls were concrete. The temperature was constant, 15 degrees Celsius, optimal for artifact preservation. He sat down. His primary arm's inner plate carried 4,234 lines now. 4,234 failures. 4,234 cadets who had walked in and failed to walk out whole. None of them had been Tellurian. None of them had carried a needle. None of them had asked which bone he wanted to break first. He looked at the tally. The lines were 1 millimeter apart. Each line represented a failure. Each failure represented a cadet. Each cadet represented a data point. The data points had formed a curve. The curve had been predictable. The predictability had been the foundation of the classification system. The foundation had cracked. The crack had started at workstation 47. The crack had spread through the pressure test, through the welding test, through the tensile test, through the press plate, through the observation deck, through the manual, through the display case, through the plaque. The crack had reached his ridges. Gray. The color meant system failure. His ridges had been gray for 183 days. They would be gray forever. Varus closed his eyes. The floor plates were still vibrating. The magnaflux chambers were still running. The pressure tests were still failing. The cadets were still rupturing and shattering and collapsing. The sounds were familiar. The sounds were ordinary. The sounds were the same sounds he had heard for 80 cycles. The sounds were different now. The difference was in him. The archive had nothing. The classification system had failed. The Forgemaster's ridges were gray. The display case glowed. The needle rested on black velvet. The wire was wrapped. The threads extended. The pressure geometry flexed. Not for instructional use. Not for understanding. Not for anything. The floor plates vibrated. Or perhaps that was just him. Varus opened his eyes. The walls were concrete. The temperature was 15 degrees. The terminal was dark. The cot was empty. The room was quiet. The vibrations stopped. The pressure test had ended. The cadets had failed. The examiners had logged the failures. The tally would grow again tomorrow. 4,235, 4,236, 4,237. The lines would continue. The gray would continue. The archive would remain empty. Varus stood up. His ridges flickered once, gray to amber, amber to gray. He walked to the display case. The needle hadn't moved. The velvet hadn't shifted. The threads hadn't frayed. The pressure geometry was intact. He read the plaque. Not for instructional use. The words meant something new. They meant we built a system that could not survive being right. They meant we spent 12,000 years learning how to break things, and we forgot how to watch someone refuse to break. They meant the archive is empty because we never thought to ask what a Tellurian would bring to the crucible. She brought a needle. She brought salt. She brought 82 beats per minute, and no elevated cortisol, and a question that cost him something he couldn't name. Which bone did you want me to break first? None of them. None of the bones. The system had broken instead. The floor plates vibrated. The magnaflux chambers cycled. The induction towers heated. The tensile press calibrated. The crucible prepared for the next cohort. 47 new cadets. 47 new failures. 47 new lines on his primary arm's inner plate. None of them would be Tellurian. None of them would carry a needle. None of them would ask. Varus turned away from the display case. The corridor was empty. The lighting was low. The walls were gray. His ridges were gray. Everything was gray. He walked. The floor plates vibrated beneath his boots. The vibrations were real. The sensors could detect them. The archive could log them. The classification system could categorize them. The archive was empty. The classification system had failed. The Forgemaster's ridges were gray. The floor plates vibrated. Or perhaps that was just him.